Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. I bet you didn't think that I would be back in your ear so soon after the last episode, but I did make a promise that I would try to edit and release as many of the episodes that I've been dawdling and sitting on to make sure that you had plenty to listen to over the Christmas break. And I don't think I've disappointed. I think it's been less than a week since I released my last episode, and here I am again, this time with Karen Inglis, a children's book author who is self-published. So listen to everything from the mode of how a self-publisher does it. And what I love about this podcast personally, what I aim to achieve with it, is that I don't want to be biased. I don't want to focus on self or trad. At the end of the day, I believe that authors need to find a home for everything that they sit and tirelessly write, right? Because everything we write, we want somebody to read it. We don't want to have sat there for a year or 2 years, or even a month, or even a day, if we wrote something in a day, like a picture book. Don't know, is that possible, picture book writers, or am I going to get knocked out for that one? I'm sure that it is just as important to write a picture book. Anyway, I am digressing. What I'm trying to say is that all books, we want readers. We want our books to have readers, and we want our name out there. And you can do it any which way, self, trad, combination of the two, as long as your books find a home. So I love bringing you information from all the places, from all the people. That's why the podcast is called The Children's Book Author. It's all about you as the author and finding your books a home, a way to reach the world and kids. That's what it's all about. So Karen is self-published, and you will be astounded by what she's managed to do with children's books. She is living proof that this saying that keeps going around the traps, which I hate, which is, we don't write children's books for the money because there is no money in children's books, is rubbish. Yes, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to get money writing children's books, but you can. And so long as you can, then you ought to aim for that. And it doesn't matter if you're sitting there, as I often am, saying, I'm not about the money. It's fine. We're not about the money. But you know what? We are about the money, because money makes life pleasant. And at the end of the day, money means more readers. And that means your books getting out and about. And with that money, you can reinvest and create more amazing things. So yes, we're not about the money, but yes, we are about the money. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Quick update from last week. What have I been up to? As you know, I finished Evie, Everyday Witch. That series is done and dusted. Fantastic. But as you listen to this episode today with Karen, you will understand that the work only begins once you've finished writing, because there is this thing called marketing, and it doesn't matter if you're trad or self-published. I heard this saying one time that said, the trad publisher gets your book into the bookstore, but it's your job to get that book out of the bookstore, i.e., how do you get people to buy it? And that's still an author's responsibility, by getting their name out there, by doing all sorts of wonderful things. And Karen's managed to do that. And what I love about this episode, and why I named it, It's Never Too Late to Start Marketing Your Book, is because 7 years after publishing it, she managed to make one of her books a massive success. 7 years. Fiction books are never out of fashion. Remember that. Maybe that's one of my sentences. Should I put that as a quote? Eleanor Page. Fiction books are never out of fashion. And to boot, it's an alliteration. I'm on the ball today, I tell you, and I haven't even done my writing for the day yet. I normally do 24,000 words till Christmas challenge. You know, me, myself, and I, the three of us, we enjoy it. We do. And no one else joins me, but that's okay because it's just my way of, in my mind, not wasting December. But more than that, I think it's utilizing the kind of crazy adrenaline rush of December. So even though, yes, like everybody else in the world, I have a million things to do, it's kind of like almost better for me to put in this writing while I'm already hyper, if that makes sense, and get it done. Whereas, you know, when you're kind of luxuriating and Netflix binging, it's very hard to get out of that mode. Well, there ain't none of that going on in December. So I normally do 24,000 words till Christmas. But this year, I'm doing 24 hours till Christmas, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an hour a day because I am editing the Magician's Academy, and it's really hard to keep a word count, though there are new words being added. But I would like to have my input here and say that it's really, really delightful to be focusing on time spent rather than words written. That might be my new thing going forward. I like it. I like it better than the pressure of having to count words. It's like I sat, I dedicated that time, and I produced what I produced, and that is great. I mean, an hour is not a lot. I normally do about 2 or 3. The other thing that I've been doing, which I thought was worth noting, is rejuvenating my newsletter subscriber list. And what does that mean? Well, you know, you've got to cull it. Look, I'm almost at, I think, 5,000 subscribers, which really isn't a lot. And that's because I have this, you'll hear me say this often in podcasts, that I have a problem with momentum. I build momentum up and then I let momentum go. And it's probably my biggest fault. Well, people that know me well could probably come up with even more faults than that. And since you've been listening to me in your ear, you'll hear even more faults than that, I'm sure. Getting that momentum and keeping it is really hard, particularly for newsletters, because you're kind of sending it out to nobody and you think, oh, I'm bothering them, I shouldn't bother them. And then you get into this bad habit of not writing to anyone for months and months at a time. And you break the cardinal rule, which is don't email your subscribers only when you have a new release coming out, which is exactly what I've been doing. And so I'm culling and rejuvenating my list. And even if I had to go back to 0 today, I'd be okay with that because, you know, when I think about even 5,000 people on a list out of how many millions and billions of people in the world, I think, you know, I really haven't made much effort on that front. And your subscriber list is so important because even if you have just one person that goes, yes, I'll leave a review, or wow, I'm going to buy that book, thank you, that's still one person more than you would have had. And it isn't really that much of an effort to write something regularly and have a good, you know, automation that moves people into your world. So I'm rejuvenating that. I'm in the process. I haven't completely finished doing that. I must confess, for those of you that have mailing lists and love MailerLite, I did move my list off MailerLite. I don't know, was it the right thing to do? Finding the right list person, subscriber, newsletter manager, there's a word for all this, always does my head in. And I think I waste a month every year checking them all out and trying to decide what to do about it. And MailerLite have their old system. But I had this gut feeling that they're not going to be delivering as well from their old system. Maybe I'm wrong, but they've now moved to a new system, which they're putting their efforts into. And I find it a little pricey. So I want to be able to grow my list without sabotaging myself to not grow my list because I'm worried about paying for my list. The counselor in me knows that we sabotage our own success for the stupidest reasons, like not wanting to pay for people on my list. And, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of people on the list are, it's a terrible thing to say, but useless people on a list. You know, they might be fans, but they don't buy anything, they don't do anything, they just sit there on my list and have to pay for them. So I moved over to SendFox, and I think I paid like $100 to be able to have 15,000 subscribers. And that's what I'm going to aim for now, because I have no more sabotage to stop me growing my list. Yes. Anyway, food for thought. The last thing I wanted to mention is a quote, and then I shall let you listen to this fantastic episode where you will learn massive amounts, and perhaps, if you are not self-published, might consider doing it after listening to this episode, at least with one of your books, hey? Well, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Damon Swade, who wrote the amazing book Must Go Read It, and actually I would love to reach out to him and get him on this podcast. So Damon, if you're listening to this and heard your name somewhere in the ethers, come on my podcast. But he wrote the fantastic book Verbalize, Bring Stories to Life and Life to Stories, one of the best writing books I've ever read. I'm only a quarter of the way through. It's highlighted with so much blue. I think there's more blue than there is black and white. That's how good it is. He has this amazing quote that I'm going to leave you with today. Once you choose to be a writer, keep on choosing to be a writer at every step. Don't you love that? Once you choose to be a writer, keep on choosing to be a writer at every step. Keep on choosing to be a writer, and I'll see you on the next episode. Welcome back to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I am your host, Eleanor Page, and today I am joined by internationally best-selling children's book author, Karen Inglis. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Eleanor. It's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to hear your voice again after such a long time.
Well, normally I like to introduce my guests with a series of specials. You know how special they are, but I'm getting kind of above 20 now, so it's seeming a little redundant. So I'm trying to pick sort of more interesting adjectives. But for you, I actually went for something even more interesting. I have my little secret book here. It is called The Little Book of Lost Words, for those of you that can't see the video. And I had a little flick through, and there weren't too many good ones, Karen. But I thought this one, Prick Me Dainty. I welcome our new guest, Prick Me Dainty, which is an overly nice person.
Oh, that's very generous of you. Very generous.
Is it generous? Or there is this one, Quaintrell. My Quaintrell guest, Karen, who is someone who lives a life full of passion, leisure, and enjoyment. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, that one goes. That one goes for me. Well, the enjoyment when it's going well, when we're, struggling with our manuscripts, that might be not quite so enjoyable.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, normally I don't read necessarily my guests' bios, but I really, really, really wanted to read yours to give people an overview of who you are. Of course, we're going to talk about all these things in detail, but it's so beautiful and it really does give such a fabulous overview of you. So, with your permission.
Go ahead.
Right, good. Karen Inglis is an international best-selling children's author of picture books, illustrated chapter books, and middle grade novels. Her time travel adventure, The Secret Lake, for ages 8 to 11, has sold, that's on purpose, has sold over 500,000 print copies in English and is in translation in 11 languages. Her other titles have also all sold in their thousands. Return to the Secret Lake, which we will talk about, is Karen's long-awaited sequel to her bestseller, was recently shortlisted in the children's categories for both the Wishing Shelf Book Awards and the UK Selfies Awards. Karen has written and presented extensively about children's self-publishing and children's book marketing. She does have book marketing books as well, which we'll talk about. And she's received traditional publishing offers over the years, but has preferred, I love this so badly, preferred to retain creative control over her work. Basically, she said no. Right, welcome to the show, Karen.
You're welcome. I'm delighted to be here because, of course, we have spoken a few years ago, a few times in the middle of the night. Somebody's time. Yeah, with Marty. Yeah, that's right. So it's great to be here. Mm.
You are a marvel. I mean, seriously, like amazing, right? Because you have written, for quite a period of time, and you've really gone on your own writing journey and your own self-publishing journey to get to what I just read to. Like HarperCollins did not get you there. Penguin did not get you there. You got you there. So start at the beginning. How did it all happen?
Well, one thing, and I say this at school visits, I never, when I was younger, thought I'm going to be a writer. And in fact, it was my sister, my older sister, who read a lot more than I did. I spent my youth riding ponies, and then as I got older, boyfriends and all the rest of it. Do you know what I mean? I really only got into reading more heavily, sort of in my sort of early teens onwards. And I only got into writing for children when the kids were born. I did dabble a little bit at university in grown-up writing, and I do have a couple of things in the drawer on that front. But it was when the children were born, I was reading these books and thinking, oh, that was good. That was boring. That was good. And then I just sort of, that's what sort of kicked me off. And I saw a fox trotting down the street one day and couldn't get him out of my mind. I got I tell this at school visits, actually. I get this tingly feeling, and it wouldn't go away. And so I started thinking, what's his name? Where's he going? He looks such a kind fox. And that's where my Ferdinand Fox rhyming stories came from. And then people started telling me about foxes they were seeing, and I couldn't stop myself coming up with the rhymes, if you know what I mean. And I actually, funnily enough, this is something I haven't probably mentioned on podcasts before. I actually have 6 rhyming Ferdinand Fox stories, 4 of which have never seen the light of day, just because getting the pictures illustrated, it's quite an involved process. And I am looking at potentially bringing those out as a collection, more of a sort of poetry type collection in due course, when I get a moment. But those were the first things I wrote. But then coming on to what was the bigger journey, The Secret Lake. People who know me will have read this, but it started a combination of 2 things. Some friends of ours moved to the communal gardens of Notting Hill, and we went up to visit them, and we had a tiny little garden here at our house. Their children suddenly had this enormous communal garden. It was so magical, with all the Victorian houses all around. And I walked out there and saw all the children playing there, and I thought, oh my God, and I got this tingly feeling, and I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if they could meet the children who lived and played here 100 years ago? And that feeling wouldn't go away. And then the Secret Lake side of it was inspired by a magical woodland close to us in Richmond Park called Isabella Plantation. So it's like a woodland within Richmond Park. And within that woodland, there are 3 ponds, one of which is called Still Pond, which inspired the lake and the Secret Lake. And for some reason, I think when I was standing in that Notting Hill garden, I could just picture the children coming down, I saw them running into a bush, and I thought, what if they found something in there, and went down, and for whatever reason, the Still Pond with all its beautiful azaleas came to my mind. And that's where that book came from. And it just struck a chord, and the reason I ended up self-publishing was that back in the very early days, the very early drafts of that book were in the early 90s. Long, long time ago. And they all went in a box. And in those days, there was no internet to send out to. So I used to send them out in a brown envelope, to 6 publishers. I think I sent them in total, probably no more than 8 publishers, or maybe there was a combination of publishers and agents. And then you used to wait 6 weeks and get the envelope back with a one-line thing saying thanks, but no thanks. I think somebody said it's too traditional. Children are looking for something more modern. And I kind of thought, oh, well, and the kids were just getting beyond being, they were getting a bit older, and I was going back to work. So I literally just put the manuscript in a box in my office and went back to my day job of professional writing for 10 years. And it was when I pulled them out, I was just starting to look out the Writers and Artists Yearbook to start once again querying, because I read it and I thought, oh, this is good. It needs a little bit of editing, but it's not bad. Suddenly I saw all this information about self-publishing, and that was in late 2010. And so I did a lot of research on it and discovered people were self-publishing, and decided, you know what, I've been consulting to government. I'm a professional copywriter. We've just done web for HM Revenue and Customs. I'm going to pursue this my own way. And that's where it really started. And it was very much a question of, I want to say, effectively hand selling for the first few years. Those were in the days before you could advertise on Amazon. So really my only way to get the book out was to go into schools and to contact local bookshops, which included my local Waterstones, which is a big chain here in the UK. And I remember them going into the one in Notting Hill to begin with, because of course there was the local connection. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh, this doesn't look self-published. Yes, we'll take it. It's got the connection." And I had already created a website, a very simple WordPress website. So she was able to look it up online before I went in. I think I phoned her and she saw the website. And I had done something that was quite revolutionary in those days. And remember, this is back in 2011. I put the first 3 chapters for free on that website. And I do remember a couple of Twitter, authors I kind of knew through Twitter saying, "Oh, that's interesting. Why are you making your content free?" And I remember thinking, well, I'm a children's author. I can't think of any other way, because I couldn't I think I was the only person self-publishing children's books. I couldn't think of any other way to try and get someone interested in the book. And that website is still there, and those 3 chapters are still there. So, that was a bit, forward. And then, so it was selling in the local bookshops. I did events and signings, but it wasn't people queuing out the door. They would just come in and I would be at a table and I'd talk to them. So word of mouth started to get out. I went into local schools, ditto. And I started, it was on Amazon and selling a bit, but, not in any huge numbers because nobody knew to look for it. So I think by 2018 or 17, I had sold about 7,000 copies. And it was when Amazon advertising opened up to indie authors, first in the States and then in the UK. That's when the difference was made. And then slowly I went from 45 reviews. I've got God knows how many reviews now. And I can just say this now because people often ask me, how come you've got so many reviews? I said, it has to be word of mouth, because I've never, ever made the book free, never once, because it was such hard work writing it. And I've never paid for a review for The Secret. So it must be word of mouth. So yeah, the story. So in a way, how I got here, I think, was the story and a lot of hard work to begin with, getting myself known locally, and kind of then taking advantage of all the things that we can now have that we didn't have back in those days, all these wonderful tools, to help us get books out there. God, that was a long answer. Sorry about that.
That was a great answer. And I'm going to start at the beginning of that answer, which was, your tingly feeling. I heard you say it twice. Like you got a tingly feeling about that fox. You got a tingly feeling about that garden. That must be almost like there's something in here, in this.
Yeah, and it won't go away. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It won't go away.
Exactly. And in fact, when I came on to do the sequel, I was doing my research for the sequel finally, 10 years on, and I got a few tingly moments while I was doing that, thinking, "Oh, I think I can use that," And I do remember when those friends moved into that the communal gardens originally, telling me about this grumpy gardener who used to confiscate the children's bikes if they left them out. And I thought, "Ooh, tingly moment. I need to have a grumpy gardener in my story." Yeah, it is. Another thing I say at school visits is I think Roald Dahl's got a quote, which is something, magic is all around if you look for it. Those who don't believe in magic will never find it. And I kind of say to children, look around, because you'll be, and if you get a feeling about somebody or something or somebody character, just keep it in mind, because you might be able to use that in a story, if they've had that effect, that visceral effect on you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's like, look for your own tingly feeling, people.
Yeah,
It'll be different
exactly.
for each of you.
Absolutely.
And what I love about this is that, you put in that groundwork, at that local level, which is, fantastic. You didn't let that, and you kept doing this for years and years. Now, It wasn't just that book. You had other books as well that you wrote. But then it was about 7 years after you wrote that story, keeping in mind that 10 years earlier, they told you that story was too old-fashioned.
Yeah.
Oh,
and too short.
Too old-fashioned, too short. It's now, I don't know, 15, 17 years later, and fiction never grows old, in the sense that fiction can live forever. We're still listening, reading Enid Blyton or Roald Dahl. So then you kind of really took it online and it went bananas.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it took and the big thing was it really took off in the States as well. 70% of my sales are in the States, which is a very big market, which is fantastic. And it's being used in schools and things. And I think they love, a traditional English story, and that was exactly what I wanted to write. I felt when I first wrote it, there weren't enough of these traditional adventure type stories, but with a modern twist, I suppose. And that's why I wrote the story I wrote. So, and I often say to people, write from the heart. I know you do, you've got to write from your heart. I mean, there is an argument to write to market, and people who can do it, fantastic. I probably couldn't. I've never tried, but writing from the heart is kind of where it happens for me. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Which
then you
probably,
find your people, you find your type of readers.
yeah, exactly. And, and some of those are a bigger market, some of them are a smaller market, but that's kind of how I roll.
Absolutely. Yeah, I often say when people say, look, I've been trying for years, but I'm done with that book now. A bit like a trad publisher would sort of go, okay, you sold 10,000, it did well, we shelve it. You didn't shelve it.
No,
I want to really highlight this to people. You stuck by this book and you persevered. And I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, when you started advertising it, it wasn't as simple as you started advertising it and it just blew. You did
no,
have to
no, it's
actually
gradual.
put work in. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell me a bit
It,
about
it was,
that.
it was very gradual. I mean, I got slightly earlier access to advertising in the UK than other people. I managed to kind of find a way of getting into Amazon Advantage, which, the whole time it was like a magic box trying to get in. But I was determined because I knew how popular it was at schools, if you know what I mean. But I mean, it didn't kind of go like that. But I certainly remember being at London Book Fair in 2018, and I was being interviewed by the self-publishing podcast, James Blatch, and saying to him, "Ooh, my ads have just started, and I've just noticed, suddenly from going to, I don't know, 4 or 5 a day, I was suddenly selling 20 a day, and was sort of going up from there." So to begin with, before all the sort of huge competition came around, when more and more people came in, it was a little bit like that, if I'm honest. Then you do have to work at it, and you have to go in and understand how all that stuff works. It's not handed to you on a plate. And one thing I do say in my nonfiction book is that I did a lot of hand selecting of keywords. I mean, there weren't things like Publisher Rocket back in those very early days, or if there was, I didn't have it, KDP Rocket, or perhaps it wasn't as sophisticated as it might be now at helping you choose keywords. I don't know. But I did a lot of mine manually. And a lot of those ads I ran in those early days are still running today and giving me a good return on investment because they've got the history behind them. So, I think the answer is nothing comes easily. You've got to work at it. You really have. You've got to learn stuff. And it's all very well asking people for shortcuts, but you learn by doing. That's my belief, which is may or may not be why I've never found Facebook ads work other than for one book, because I haven't spent enough time trying to really test them. I think because it takes so much money before you know it. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, these things do take time and money, don't they? And
Yeah.
incredible tenacity, which you obviously have over like a decade of of doing these things.
And you,
But
yeah.
I'm a little bit
Yeah.
of a newer kid on the block, shall we say? And yeah, definitely haven't quite got that tenacity. But I was given good advice by a historical fiction author who does very well with her books on Amazon, who said to me one time, it doesn't matter for the first 6 months you lose money or break even, keep doing it
Yes.
because
Yeah.
the algorithms get to know you and people buy what's popular. So it's just the way it goes, right? People buy
Yeah.
what's already popular. So whatever's being shown to lots of people and more people start clicking on, then it starts to show to more and more people, and more click on it. So it's kind of, that's the logic of it.
Yeah. And then you start to get the reviews, and then, then it sort of starts to sort of snowball, I suppose. Yeah, absolutely. I think the story has to, because I have sold all my other books literally in their thousands. But so things like, for example, Eek the Runaway Alien is a very funny book. School visits, kids love it. It's about this alien who runs away from space to Earth because he loves football and the World Cup's on. And I've just had actually the front cover updated and the interior redone, but it doesn't sell nearly as many as I think it should. And so sometimes it's not always going to work. I mean, that may also be because it's sort of appealing for reluctant readers who are less likely probably to go online and actually take the time to leave a review, which then in turn, that would mean the algorithms don't show it perhaps as often as they would. Yes, it doesn't sell online. So if I go to school events, it sells in the same way that The Secret does. It's sort of predictable, and the feedback, the kids love it. But marketing it online is much harder. And so, it's not as though everything works perfectly. And that maybe it's a combination of the fact that The Secret Lake has an appeal across so many age groups. I often get, women in older people, grandparents saying, I've read it and I loved it. And the same for the sequel. So there's a combination of things going on. And certainly I do know from speaking to other authors, some of them said, just sometimes I think it's about the story as well. It's not just about how much you're marketing it. You can't, there's a limit maybe to how much one can do. So maybe Eek is competing with many more books that of a similar, and it's not a series. You see, that's where I think writing a series, it probably pays off, because you can then hook them in for the remaining ones, and then all the kids tell each other about the series. So so there we go. But I haven't given up on it, definitely, which is why I've had the new cover done, and so on. Yeah.
And that might be the case, all those factors, or it might just be, like you said, that the algorithms haven't loved it yet. Like sometimes it's as silly as that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's, so I'll never give up on it, and I'll keep plugging away at it, as you do with all of them, Interestingly,
it's a different. Go for it.
What I was going to say, interesting, because coming onto the sort of advertising side, and I don't know whether you've had success advertising on Facebook. I've not made Facebook really work for me, other than with one of my books, which is the Tell Me Tree, which is the one about, I don't know if you know the one I mean. It's about,
I do. It's beautiful.
I am the Tell Me Tree. Why don't you come and sit by me? And with that one, because it's not nonfiction, it's sort of fiction, but it's bordering on nonfiction. It's all to do with mental health and sharing how you're, talking about your feelings, and that's been picked up by teachers and librarians, and which meant that I could target them, particular groups, like people who work in children's mental health, primary teachers, and that did work on Facebook for quite a long time. Got loads and loads, over 1,000 likes, comments, goodness knows what, and I could see the crossover into sales in Amazon. But even that, after a while, has sort of, I think, you hear that it peters out, the return on investment peters out. But as long as and I'm not running any ads on it at the moment, but I will do periodically. And as long as you're breaking even or not losing too much, it just helps with that whole word of mouth side of things. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And there is, what I've realized is it seems to be a point of momentum. Like what I've experienced is I put in momentum and it pays off. And then if I drop my momentum, it drops off. And then I got to build it again and build it again. But what it seems like, and we can only postulate about these things, is that like The Secret Lake got to a particular level of momentum where now it's like nothing can ever take it down.
Careful. I don't want to jinx myself.
We are not jinxing.
But yes, yes, exactly. But it's also got those historical ads that have worked well, that have carried on working well, and, bless them, people keep leaving reviews, which is fantastic.
Which is really great. And like you said, it appeals to the grandmothers, which is a big selling point online. They buy a lot of the kids' books, actually.
Yeah, yes, actually, absolutely, yes. And of course, what I've been able to do, which I'm sure you do, because this is really the first time I've done a proper series, is in the back of The Secret Lake now, on the last page, I'm able to mention the sequel and even have a QR code so they can go and find out about it. So that's a good tip for anyone not already doing that, which I'm sure everyone is who writes in a series. But for me, that's a bit novel.
Go get the next book. So it was about 10 years later that you wrote that book. What made you, because again, one of the things that I often brag to people about you, Karen, is, when they say you have to write series, and actually really you proved that's not necessarily the case. You made A Secret Lake successful before there was another book, and that's a fact. That's a fact.
Yeah,
Write that
it
down,
is.
everybody.
Yeah,
it is.
yes,
so then what made you decide, hey, I'm actually going to write another book?
Well, what it was, but part of the reason to begin with that I wasn't was because when I did the first book, it was such hard work because I was going around in lots and lots of circles. I sort of exhausted myself, and it had gone in that, for 10 years, come back out again. So I remember distinctly getting towards the end thinking, oh, I'm just going to finish this in a way that it could stand alone. But I left a tiny chink that I could write a sequel if I wanted to. The reason there was such a long delay was a couple of reasons. I then got sidetracked writing other children's books and also my non-fiction books. But also the better it did, and then people started asking me, is there a sequel? And I would say, oh, no, I would never say no, but I would never say never, but then more people started asking, and then I was slightly daunted because I thought, well, hang on, this book has done so well. I'm not going to write a sequel just for the sake of it, to make money. I don't want to spoil the first story, and I can't bear it if I wrote something that didn't live up to it. I really knew that it had to be at least as good as the first book. And so it was a daunting prospect to do it in a way, because if it failed miserably, it's that fear of failure that all authors have. And that's why it took so long to do. But then what had happened was I'd finished a whole load of projects, and suddenly in the summer of 2021, beginning of the summer, I realized, and I think I'd got out the second edition of How to Self-Publish and Market a Children's Book. And I realized, hang on, if I'm ever going to do a sequel, and another author had said to me, why aren't you doing a sequel? Why? And I started to think, why aren't I? And I thought, well, come on, let's just go and do some research. And I had I had the front cover. This is the front cover. If anyone hasn't seen it, they probably have. I had this image in my mind of a child. It was a tingly feeling sort of thing of a child who'd come from the past and was standing looking up at Stella's window. And I didn't even know who the child was. I hadn't decided who it was, but I knew they were coming from the past for a reason. And so then I started doing the research. And because I didn't know what the story was going to be, I just started reading around, which I'm doing again now, actually, back into that whole period. And some of the, even pre-Edwardian, so it's set in the Edwardian period. I started reading back, about the history, social history of the Edwardian period, non-fiction books, fiction books set in that time. And it was doing all that I then started to get ideas for the second book. But it was the delay was having the confidence to know that I could write something that was as good, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally do. And did it flow and come quite easily in the end, or was it a few years in the writing? Like what was the process of it?
Well, the interesting thing is, and again, this is something I tell to school visit children, is with The Secret Lake, I did what they call discovery writing, or pantsing as it used to be called. I had that idea of the children going back in time, and I just started writing. And of course, because I had no plan, I just went all over the place, backwards, forwards, round in circles, days on end, months on end. And the whole thing, if I had to shove together all the time it took to write the book, was probably 9 solid months of writing. by the time I'd fixed it and edited it, or maybe even got to the first draft, I can't quite remember. It was a long, long time, and it was only 22,500 words over all that time. Whereas with Return to the Secret Lake, the one thing I said to myself is I'm going to have a plan. I'm not going to start writing until I have a plan. And so I did it very differently. And I had found that had worked when I wrote Eek. I had a sort of an outline plan. And because I have a background in business writing, obviously, when I came to write my big non-fiction books, I knew what I was going to write before I started. I had an index. I knew a table of contents. I structured it as I would do strategy reports in my day job, if you see what I mean. I knew that. And so I sort of applied that with Eek. And then when I came to do Return to the Secret Lake, as I was getting my ideas, doing my research, I just thought, actually, I'm not going to start writing anything till I know where this book is going, because I don't want to end up like The Secret Lake. And so I used Word. Just in outline form. I've tried Scrivener once or twice a long time ago and didn't do it for me. I just like a simple Word document. And if you go into view, outline view, you can just create bullet points and drag and drop things around into sections, a bit like PowerPoint slides. And so, as I started to get the idea for the story, I just used that for the planning. Got stuck at a couple of points, had to overcome that, was doing more research, thinking about it. But then I finally had my plan, and then I started writing, and it was so much easier. And things changed, as they do. They surprise you, and things happen you don't expect. But overall, it meant that this book, which is 52,500 words, whereas The Secret Lake was 22,500 words, this took me 2 months of research. And then, I don't know, within that, the planning side, and then start to finish writing another 2 months, editing a month. I mean, it was 5 months as opposed to 9 months. It was a much faster process. So I do say to children, you fail to plan, you plan to fail, or, have a plan of some sort. So it was much easier. Yeah, it was much easier, even though when I did start writing, there were a couple of things I hadn't resolved. But I suddenly knew, actually, I'm ready to write. And once I'm in the story, I'll work it out, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a great encouragement to challenge your own techniques or your own routine of writing. You've got to try everything, don't you, to see which one fits you.
Yes, exactly. And I do strong. I had watched a couple of courses. Is Joe Nasty, I think, has a course which I took, which I really liked. The fact that, and he writes thrillers or something like that. But he, his whole thing was, you have a plan, and I wasn't following his template or anything like that. But I liked the fact he talked about the fact that just because you have a plan, it doesn't mean things can't change. It just means you kind of have an overall structure to begin with. So when things do change, at least you kind of know how to move things around, whereas when I remember at one point with The Secret Lake, I thought I'd finished it, and I was on holiday with Bob, and he was reading it, and he said, and I got the first proof by then. He said, hang on, blah, 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 blah. If this is the case, then that makes Mrs. Moon 120 or something.
He's a good proofreader, a very good proofreader.
I know. So, yeah. So there we go. So that, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to live up to the first book, but in fact, it worked out well, and it was easier to write because I had a plan. So there you go.
And 15 years later, you became a better author because you had written lots of other books and done a lot of school visits and gotten even more of that infused in you.
Exactly. And I would say that to anyone. You really do. It's having that experience as well, and the confidence and what have you. So yeah, it was good fun.
So how do you decide what you're working on? Do you sort of go, do you have a plan in that regard, or do you just see what the tingly feeling? How do you work it out?
It's the tingly feeling.
I love it.
And that probably explains, which is why I say to, a lot of people, I say it's by accident rather than design that I write across a whole range of age groups, because it really is what comes at me and makes me think, oh, you've got to write a book about that. Like the Tell Me Tree. The Tell Me Tree was inspired by a tree that I noticed in Barnes. We live in a village called Barnes, or it's Barnes Village. It's by the River Thames. It's in London, but it's on the edge of London. And there's a beautiful old plane tree there. And we were walking home one night, and it's on the green by the pond. And suddenly in the light, and it was winter, I just saw this incredibly wise face and chin and hair coming up. And I thought, oh my God. I said, well, look at that tree. It just looks like this really wise old gentleman. And there was just something about it. And I just thought, I've got to write a story about this tree. But actually, I didn't get the story until 2 years later. And that was because I kept thinking, what's this story about the tree going to be? I don't know. And then, bizarrely, I was in reading a conversation in one of the children's Facebook groups that many of us belong to. And I think it was the one in the States, one of the big ones. And there was a mother there. And I don't know why I was reading this particular thread randomly, actually, just saying, our daughter came home from school the other day and drew a picture, and we suddenly realized that she wasn't happy at school. And I got this sort of feeling. I thought, oh my God. And I suddenly, as I was driving to the gym that morning, I just suddenly thought, oh, the tell me tree. This is going to be the tell me tree. Why don't you come and sit by me? Tell me your troubles, tell me your cares, share your best dreams or your scary nightmares. And I found myself saying this out loud, and actually had to record it into my phone when we got to the car park, because I thought, I'm going to forget all this. And it pretty much is what the book has ended up being. I mean, it took a bit of editing because it was too long to begin with, but suddenly it's a tree where children can come and share their feelings, whether they're happy, sad, or anywhere in between, through writing, drawing pictures, or conversation, and can be with their friends, the teacher, the family. It doesn't matter. But that, again, the book came to me rather than the other way round, and hence that ended up being what it is. The Christmas Tree Wish, we were driving past a nursery, a nursery garden centre just before Christmas, and I saw this tiny little Christmas tree that was left all on its own, and it was a bit bedraggled, and I thought, oh God, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought, I've got to write a story and give him a happy ending. But that took a long time because I couldn't work out that whole sort of dilemma about Christmas trees getting chopped down and eventually dying, But I then did in the end come up with the story for the Christmas Tree Wish, where he gets a happy ending because a little boy with a broken arm chooses him because he's got a broken arm just like the tree. And because the tree's really worried he's not going to get picked for Christmas Day because, the snow has broken his branches, and he's got lovely friends all around him, Cedric Cypress and Penelope Pine, saying, don't worry, everyone, nobody's perfect. Look at this bump in the middle of my trunk. And, and then the other one turning around saying, look at my bottom, it sticks out. We've all had those trees that you take home and the bottom of the tree, if you turn it round, it's not even, But that took a couple of years to get that idea. But all of those stories I'm probably not unique in that sense. I just find it a little bit hard to deliberately say, I'm going to write this book, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
Hence,
but you're collecting it little at a time and putting it together. Almost like problem solving it. You're problem solving it.
Yes. And I think the thing is, now I am doing the research for the third book for The Secret Lake, because I feel it needs to have a third book at the very least. And that's more of a deliberate thing, which feels a bit scary. But equally, that's what happened with Return to the Secret Lake. And I do similarly have an idea in my mind of what the cover's likely to be and who the character's likely to be, and that's sort of helping drive my sort of research and my thought process. So I'm very much at the research, tumbling around in my head ideas and note taking at the moment, and having fun reading.
Fantastic. And has it helped the series to have a sequel to it? Is it true what they say about series in your experience?
It helped what, sorry?
Does it help the sales? Like, do they start to actually flow through? Does that actually?
Oh, I see. Yes, yes, they do. I mean, the Return to the Secret Lake will never sell. I mean, I doubt it will ever sell anything like The Secret Lake. But I mean, it's sold now over 11,500 copies in print.
Never say never, Karen. Never say never.
Exactly, and that's in a year. And I think it's a longer book, and the reviews are coming in. But I'm very happy with that, because exactly with every book, when we publish it, you sit there thinking, people are going to hate it, or they're not going to like it. But, the reviews have been lovely. And I tell you what's fantastic is that the trouble is with the plot. I don't know whether you've read it, but there's stuff in there, historical stuff, which if you start mentioning it in reviews, it kind of acts as a spoiler.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, and people are very good at not having divulged that, which I'm very pleased about, actually. But yeah. So
That's amazing. So how did you educate yourself, to the point where you know so much, and you've written a nonfiction book, of course, which, because you are such a fantastically amazing left brain person, that book is set out so brilliantly. Go definitely and read it, because, it really is the A to Z
very
of
structurally.
Self-publishing,
Yeah.
and particularly in children's books, which is, we get told it's harder in children's books. You won't make money in children's books, and it's not true. You can.
No, it's money. Not. It's not. And there are lots of people doing very well, with that. And the reason I wrote that was that what your question was? I don't.
Yes.
Was that
and
sort of your question?
How did you learn all the things so that you could write it? But tell us,
well,
why did you write it?
I think that the reason I wrote it was when I first started self-publishing, I created a website, because I have two websites. I have my author website, kareninglisauthor.com, and then I have my writer-facing website called selfpublishingadventures.com. And the reason I created that in 2011, I think, when I was doing The Secret Lake. And I did it partly because of my background in business writing. I used to consult to the government here in the UK, putting stuff into plain English on tax and financial services. And it was in my DNA to want to explain things in plain English. And I think as I was learning what I was learning with self-publishing, I wanted to document it for other people who were coming into that area, particularly as I knew that there were very few children's authors at that time. And so it was that's how I started off doing it, including things like understanding tax on US royalties, which I wasn't scared to research and write about because of my background in financial services and consulting for HM Revenue and Customs here in the UK. So that's what started it off. And then as, over the next few years, of course, things start to change really quickly. And I just thought, I can't keep this website up, because it's free, it's very time consuming. And I thought, actually, what I need to do is write a book. And so that's why I then did the first edition, I think it was in 2018, of How to Self-Publish a Children's Book and Market. Was it and Market? I can't remember what I called it, the first one. Oh, it was How to Self-Publish and Market. I'm going to just grab my copy of the second one.
Yes, it has such a cute cover. Show us for those who are watching. For those who are not watching, perhaps you can describe it for us.
I will do. Okay, so that was the first one. Yes, that was the first book, How to Self-Publish and Market a Children's Book, which is kind of that big. And it's got a lovely, which is Rachel Lawston who did my cover for me. She's fantastic. She's worked in traditional for a long time. It's got sort of some pretend children's houses or little houses on the front, hasn't it? And
they almost look a bit bookish. They look bookish.
Yes, they look like books turned into little houses. Yes, exactly. So that was the first edition, and then the second edition. Of course, things had changed so much. This is my, my proof copy there, but you can see it's a lot thicker because so much had changed, and so that was the second edition. And then what I did was, just while I'm holding them up, I'll just do this. Is I then thought, well, there'll be a lot of people who don't necessarily need to know how to self-publish because they've been doing it a long time, but they just want to know how to market their children's books. So what I did was the second half of that book effectively is in this one here, which is called How to Market a Children's Book. So if people didn't want to spend on the bigger one, they've got the option.
Clever.
But as you say, it's very comprehensive. And the way I went about it was I just knew all the new things I had learned, as we all have, as all these wonderful tools have come online, and I wanted to document that. And so I very much approached it the way I would have done, as I say, in my consultancy business. I sketched out a strategy report effectively. I've done a lot of marketing reports in my time, and I wanted people to be able to go in. So it does have a huge index at the beginning, or table of contents, where you can go in and skip to whichever part is most relevant for you. But, as we know, it's changing the whole time, self-publishing. So in due course, that will need updating again. I mean, just as that was coming out, Atticus was just about to be announced. So I said, look, there is Vellum, fantastic tool if you've got a Mac, but there's this thing called Atticus coming out. So go and Google it, because by the time you're reading this, it's probably out. And it will need updating again. And one thing I do say to people, if you're going to buy it, I would highly recommend buying the print book and not the ebook, even though I make more money if you buy the ebook. The reason being, I don't know about you, I like to have a reference book on my table. To go into my Kindle and look something up. I'm very much
I must confess.
Are you an ebook?
I have one of each.
Oh, right. Yes.
And the reason for that, I'll be honest, is because I'm often lying in bed and thinking, how did Karen do that? Reach for the Kindle, because I'm not going to jump out of bed to go get the paperback. And I often reference you first thing in the morning. I often look you up first thing in the morning, believe it or not, Karen. I'm like, go do it in the ebook, and then I'm like, oh, that's great. When I get up, I'm going to look for that in the actual paperback copy, and then I've got it on my desk. So they're both useful in different ways.
They are. I mean, the one thing, once somebody said to me, why haven't you got an index at the back? Can you imagine how much work that would be?
That would be a lot of work.
I know. And Vellum, I don't know, maybe Vellum does offer that now. It certainly didn't when I did it. I mean, the great thing was when I did this second edition, Vellum, and by the way, anyone listening who doesn't know what Vellum is, it's one of the fantastic book formatting tools that we now have access to, particularly if you've got Word. When I did the first edition of this, I said to the Brads who own it, I said, look, Brad, I can't do, why can't I do...
Brads. In case anybody missed that, it's the Brads, because two people called Brad made Vellum. So we call them the Brads.
The Brads, exactly. And I said, why can't I indent on my table of contents? Now that you can do now, but in the first edition you couldn't. It was just one level. But that's an example of how it's changing all of the time. So it's never always going to be up to date. But I think it's because it's coming back to why I wrote it, it's just in my DNA to explain things, to put them in plain English and to help people. But I felt that the website was never going to be able to keep up. And I ought to. I mean, and I'm very, very lax. I don't really advertise this book. I occasionally run an ad on Amazon. I should do so more. But it's there, and it's slowly. I think the first book garnered, 150 reviews or something. And of course, you have to start again from scratch with a new one. So I think this one's got about 50. But they're all very nice reviews.
Well, let's hope it jumps up even more after people listen to this. And this podcast is evergreen, so whenever you're listening to it, that's one of the things I love about it. Like even over Christmas, where I hadn't put an episode out for ages. But it was obviously a really popular time, and there were so many listens to old episodes, and I thought there's never an old episode,
No, exactly. Yeah. And I know I listen to Joanna Penn's podcasts when I'm on the treadmill, and I have a few that I listen to regularly. So they're not all children's books ones by any means. I get a lot of my strategic thinking and I'm very interested in the world generally of self-publishing, and there's a lot more in the adult world. But Jo very much, she's always saying what the date is, because, because she's always talking. Yes, because when a lot of things she talks about are things like AI and that kind of stuff. But, all that stuff is we are recording this as of March 2023 or whatever it is. So that if someone listening, if what you are talking about isn't evergreen, but what we are talking about sort of is, it's just the fact that you're putting out books and it's challenging, and what sorts of things can you do to help. But they last forever. And
so you are the publisher of your books, not just the author, and you have managed to get foreign rights deals for, at least I know, The Secret Lake. Like, what does that process involve? Talk us through a little bit of that.
Right, yeah. So I've got yes, The Secret Lake has now sold foreign rights to 11, it might even be 12 countries. And I've also managed its translation into German. And I've also sold the rights for Return to the Secret Lake to 2 countries now, which is fantastic. The process.
So explain what selling the rights actually, sorry to interrupt, what selling the
Okay.
rights actually means, because some people may not even be aware of that.
No, you're right. Selling foreign rights. Basically, it's when a traditional publisher from another country says they would like to publish your book in their territory, in their language. And the way it would normally work, for the non-indie author, is they would have an agent who would go out and go to the book fairs and sell and seek publishers from other countries at that book fair and say, look, here's this book. Do you want to have it? Would you like to publish it under your imprint in your country, in your language? And then they do a deal. They do a licensing deal where they agree in advance and they agree royalties, a bit like exactly like a traditional publishing deal. So that's what selling rights is all about. Now, in my case, although in the early days of London Book Fair, I did stomp around a bit and think, going up to various foreign publishing stands and saying, I've got a couple of books here. Would you be interested? They're actually the wrong people, because it turns out the rights buyers are all in a separate hall that nobody can get through unless you've got an appointment, if you know what I mean. So I did a bit of that. But what happened was, as the Secret Lake sales took off, I started to get inquiries about, would I be interested in selling the rights? In fact, the very first inquiry I got was from Eek, funnily enough, from Turkey. But anyway, so that's what's happened. So they've approached me, and because I'm a member of the Alliance of Independent Authors and the Society of Authors here in the UK, both of those organisations will look at contracts that you're sent and give you feedback on them, tell you whether they think they're fair or what to look out for. And when you're first starting out, it's very, you don't really know what you're doing. You learn by doing. And I remember looking at these contracts thinking, I don't understand what this is talking about. And I was with my little plain English hat on thinking at some point I'm going to sort this out. And what's happened is, over time, as they come to me, you start to understand the process more. And what they will typically do is they will say, could we please, are the rights available for, let's say, the Czech Republic? And you'll say yes. And then they say, well, could we please have a reading copy? And in the early days, I used to think, why do they need a PDF? Why can't they just buy the book? But this just seems to be how it goes. And so what you do is you 100% check the credentials of the company before you send them anything. And the best thing to do is to look up their website, see what other children's authors they have. And in the case of most of mine, they are very well established, and you can tell because if they're selling Harry Potter or they've translated David Walliams or whoever it might be. And so you send the PDF, and then if they like it, they will write to you and say, we'd like to make you an offer. And they will, say, we would like to offer you an advance of X amount. We will pay you royalties of X amount. And we'd like the term to be, they usually say 7 years, and you immediately then have to negotiate to bring it back to something shorter. And so where the Alliance of Independent Authors can help you, either through their advice service, or there's a booklet. If you're a member, there's a free booklet that goes through all of this. You can then negotiate the terms with them to try and increase the royalty rate they're offering you and the advance or whatever it is, and reduce the time that your contract is for. 5 years is what you want to be aiming for, not 7. And so that goes back and forth at very high level, a few bullet points. And once you've agreed in principle, you will then, in my first few deals, they sent me the contract. So I had a Russian deal and I had an Albanian deal, and they both sent me their contracts, both of which were honestly a sort of a bit of a dog's dinner. You could see that they were mishmashes of loads of different contracts. And so, but as time has gone on and I've done more, I thought, right, enough is enough. I'm going to create my own with my business consultancy hat on. So I have now, through learning and doing, got my own plain English version, which means I now say to them, I will supply you the contract because you have the right. I think they would, when you don't know what you don't know, you'll accept what they send you, but you can say to them, no, no thanks, I'll supply the contract. Which is what I do now. And it's relatively quick because I know, and I've even gone through and given every section a number and sub numbers, because that was the other thing. You're kind of looking down the contract. Where's that bit about this? Well, if everyone's got if you've got sections named and sub numbered, it's just much easier to find things. So that's what happens, and then you sign the deal, and then you may or may not also sell them, license them the right to use your artwork, which in most cases of mine they want to do. The only one so far that hasn't is China, and you probably saw, I think I put it on Instagram, the Chinese cover of Return of the Secret Lake with all the dancing moles above the lake.
Yes.
Yeah, that's quite fun.
So it's really cute. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that they wanted to do their own? But that is just genius advice, and I love that. You can do your own contract. Get out. That's amazing.
I mean, I still, and actually when I sent it to the Society of Authors, I said, oh God, this is a really good contract. And I said, yeah, well, I do have a business writing background. And I just got fed up with, I mean, you've just got to read them through and say, what are you saying? Let's put this in plain English, you know.
So you took some bits of theirs and rewrote it to make it a bit more.
I rewrote the facts in plain English because, you know, it's typical lawyer stuff. You know, my son's a lawyer, by the way. But, you know, I just thought I'm putting this into plain English. Yes, it is. But you know, I've got that strong background in that area, and I just thought I'm going to do this for myself. And so, but the principle is get your offers, go to the Alliance of Independent Authors. So if you're in America, I think I forgot, the Independent Authors Guild, is it? Or it's called the Authors Guild. I'm sure you've got an equivalent in Australia where they can vet your contract, and Alliance of Independent Authors will also look at that for you if you have an offer, and just making sure that whoever it is a bona fide publisher, because some of them are not really. You have to be a bit careful. Always look on Writer Beware, and you know, if you're in doubt, email Victoria Strauss to check whether she knows, because one of the Turkish ones that approached me, there was just something not right about it, and she said, hang on, I've had this name has come up a few times before. So that's that. I mean, you can also, if I know of at least one independent author here in the UK who uses an agency. There are some agents that will specialize in representing independent authors who to do foreign rights only. And if you've got a good track record of selling, you know, that might be a good route to go, you know, because they go to the book fairs and will actively market your book. Which, you know, I think the thing is, because I've got these unsolicited requests that have come in, I've sort of by osmosis gone that route. Had that not been happening, I might well have done the same thing. And at some point I might in the future, because, you know, just keeping tabs on everything. And then at that point, you would be paying a commission to the agent. Right. And in fact, one of my deals with Turkey, I was approached by a Turkish agent rather than the actual publisher. So in that case, the Turkish agent got 10% or something to that effect. The other thing you have to be aware of with foreign rights is tax and tax treaties. And, you know, when you're doing the deal, certainly if you're in the UK, they will often ask for a certificate of tax residence to prove that your company is a UK taxpayer, and so you have to go through a process with HM Revenue and Customs to get that, which is another learning curve, which now I kind of know to ask for in advance. Yeah. So I don't know whether that gives a sort of broad brush. I mean, the other thing I've done, which is again covered in the second book, How to Self-Publish, second edition one here, is I've managed my own translation into German on a few titles, and that, you know, there are various ways you can do that, which would include going to somewhere like Readsy and sourcing translators that way, because they will have been vetted. Do not use AI. Do not use your friend down the road who speaks French. Absolutely don't. I mean, I did do a postgraduate module in literary translation many years ago. I've got a French degree. So that was French to English. I mean, it's so nuanced when you're writing. You have to have a writing background to do the translation. So what I did was, being me, as I'm talking about, manually doing this, I went online, looked at translators of children's books in the genre that I write in Germany, and found someone that way, then found what the German literary translation associations were to make sure they were members of them, so I knew what they were doing, and got my translator that way, and she'd translated Enid Blyton before, that sort of thing. So it's that question of do it properly if you're going to do it. And then you have to pay a German editor and a German proofreader. I mean, it's not cheap. And
I hadn't thought of that.
No, yeah, you have to, because, the translator is like anything else. The translator, then you need someone. And again, I had experienced, traditionally published German children's book editor who's worked in the traditional industry, who it turned out had worked with this by coincidence. I think they worked together a few years earlier. And then she said, I have a proofreader. So the proofreader came along, and because although I have an O-level in German, because I'm so old, we did O-levels, not GCSEs. I couldn't possibly, even though I understand a bit of it, I wouldn't dream of thinking, of trying to assess whether it was any good. But one thing I would recommend in terms of German translation is only consider doing that sort of thing if your book's already selling well in English in that country. So The Secret Lake was selling well, because I think it's an expense. It's not cheap to do translation. So you need to know that there's a market there. That's for further down the line. That's for your advanced self-publishing when you've got your book out there already selling. Yeah.
That's such solid, great advice. I'm going to take notes when I listen back to all that. But it is in your book. It is in your book. And 100% it's in there. I've seen it in there because, when I got approached, I was like, where is Karen's book?
Yes.
She's got things in there.
Yes.
So one little question about the nonfiction book, and I think it's an important one, though I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you so that the listeners can discover the answer, is I noticed that you have a P in the middle of your name. Was it a P? Karen P.
Yes,
Inglis?
yes, Patricia.
Patricia, I love it. And why did you choose to do that?
So that basically I don't confuse my audience. So that my nonfiction, I didn't want my nonfiction book turning up in my also boughts for my children's writing. So, and confusing the algorithms on Amazon and elsewhere. So that, that's just the simple thing. It seemed to be the simplest thing to do. If ever I were to write an adult novel, I'd have to come up with another variation. I was thinking that, because I wouldn't want to, again, it's all to do with also boughts, isn't it? And things like that. It's the reason also, slightly going off topic, actually, this isn't to do with pen names. I like to keep things fairly streamlined. So, for example, on Instagram, I do have 2 Instagram accounts, one for my more personal posts and one for my book posts. And it was partly because I didn't want to bore my friends who are not necessarily buying my children's books with all my children's book information. And I didn't want to necessarily bore my children's book buyer, readers, whatever, with my holiday information and my mum's 98th birthday, which they may or may not. They can go and follow both. But I kind of think if you keep things on topic, that's probably better overall for relevance, which in turn is relevant for algorithms. Although I am the worst person in the world to post regularly on things like Instagram, and I try hard to do it more often on Facebook, but but I think it is what it is. You kind of do what's right for you, don't you?
Yeah, exactly right. And but it's really an important point, isn't it? Because anything online really does depend on those beautiful algorithms, which are kind of memory, aren't they? They're memory, like the AI thing. It's not an intelligent person. Although I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like Apple still kind of really is quite human, I think. I don't know, maybe I'm making that up, but I remember reading that somewhere, it's not so algorithm driven. Like they'll actually choose which books that they want to promote.
Yes, which I remember that from the App Store days when I had an app out for Ferdinand Fox and just being totally fed up about it. That, you know, it seemed to be, it kind of reminds you of that thing of the olden days of the bookshops just placing all the books on the table at the front from the publishers who would pay them the most. Do you know what I mean? And you're just thinking, oh, they don't do it so much now, but I think some of them do, you know. But yes, I don't know, because I'm not, in terms of Apple, I am wide with my nonfiction, but with my ebooks, my children's ebooks are all in KDP Select. And the reason for that is, another tip, is I feel, and I have no proof of this, but I kind of feel that Amazon is so keen to push KDP Select that it will put your ebook more often in front of people than if it was wide. And I don't know about you, but 95% of my books are sold in print. You know, only 5% ebook. But the fact they see the ebook, they just flip over and go and buy the print book. And I think so you can use the ebook, the Kindle Unlimited ebook, in my view, to help market your print book. Of which most online sales for me certainly come from Amazon online sales, whereas other print book sales tend to be through bookshops, which is that whole separate Ingram, and upfront print, separate upfront prints I do, which go to Gardner's, one of our distributors.
So again, it's like, you know, you're thinking like that publisher, not just the writer. What works best to get those books to your audience. And I would even argue, sorry, publishers, I would argue that, you know, in some ways you have the advantage online, because I don't see them often doing those things online. Maybe I don't want them to. I don't know. Don't do it if you're watching this, publishers. But, you know, like they tend to overprice the books. I'll look up, you know, really popular authors who have massive sales I know of in Australia, and they'll have like 2-3 reviews on Amazon, and I think, like that.
Yes.
Their books could do so well online, but they don't seem to really push them there. I don't know.
No, and I suppose the authors don't have any control over that, because they're not in control, which is why, I mean, I said to you, well, you said in the introduction, I have been offered traditional publishing deals, and I just didn't want to give up that control. You know, money aside, which didn't really make sense for me. In fact, it didn't make sense for me. But I just thought it was giving up that control. I really enjoy that sort of control. It's sort of, you know, I think it's a nice, it's just a lovely business to be involved in. And, you know, I'm sure had I accepted a traditional deal with this big publisher that approached me just before I wrote the sequel, it may well have sold more, but I have absolutely no regrets about that, because I just like to be in control of my destiny.
And we'll never know if it would sell more, really, because, I mean, I don't know. It's done very well completely with you being in control. So keep being in control.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's you know, like you get to do all the foreign rights deals, and, you know, get those experiences, and, you know, a different level of money that you would get versus if that was coming through your publisher. So we'll never know, like all other things.
No, but I can't imagine not being able to log on and see my sales for the day. I think I'd find it so frustrating. Well, it's a little bit like, as we know, any of us who submitted to publishers, you're just waiting and waiting to hear. And, you know, I still see people talking about, you know, querying and waiting for 2 years. And, you know, these days there is so much available there for people to use freelancers to do it professionally. I mean, a lot of editors from traditional publishing houses are now available to hire through things like Readsy. I mean, certainly the editor I used for Walter Brown and the Magician's Hat was ex-HarperCollins. You know, they're all sort of doing their own indie thing as well. So there's lots of options out there now. But, you know, some people just want that validation of being traditionally published. And
or they
that's
just
fine.
don't know
Horses-
any other way. They just don't know
No.
any other way.
Unless they read my
think
book.
Yes, I was going to say that. They get that book.
Absolutely.
And, talking about the ebook paperback, interestingly, I don't know why, but the last maybe 6 months, like, for example, my series, Evie Everyday Witch, the ebooks are now overtaking the print, and that's never happened before. I'm like,
That's
what's
interesting.
going
Yeah,
on?
no, that is. Yeah. And is that wide, or is it? Are they selling mostly wide or mostly on Amazon?
No, they're on Amazon. They're exclusive. So with
Yeah.
exclusivity, if you're wondering, as a listener, it's only about the ebook. You have to choose whether to have them only on Amazon or have them on all the platforms. And in my experience, you don't really sell a lot of children's books on the other platforms as yet. Someone else might have.
I've tested it twice, and yeah. And so that's interesting. There is a friend I know here in the UK called Carl Ashmore, and he said he writes sort of So Carl,
I know
he
Carl.
said I don't. He says oh, it's really odd because he says I sell more ebooks than print. He's not sure why, and he was saying I must be doing something wrong. And I meant to say to him, actually, no, well, that's good for you because it's you get a good royalty, and it's less hassle in some ways if you're doing beyond Amazon. I mean, it's less hassle, as in if you're also then supplying to bookshops and what have you. If you're doing one off your ebooks, that's great.
That's right. And one of the great things that Amazon often does is with print and with ebook. I've seen it work even better in print, but if they see your book selling well, they'll discount it even more, right? So they'll have it. Let's say, I mean, you've got it for $9.99. They might put it for $7.99 or something, right? Or even $5.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll do crazy things like that, and they'll still pay you the royalty that you set at $9.99.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the buyers suddenly the sales go. And you're like, what's happening here?
Yeah, so with print books, 100%. Yeah, you still get the full royalty, which is great, So it's good. All good.
I've learned so much from having you on the show, as always, and I already knew a lot of the things, but I still learned a great deal more from talking with you on the show. So,
it's been absolutely great. It's been lovely to see you, Eleanor, after so long. At some stage, we'll have to meet up. One day I'll come to Australia.
I'm coming to England next year.
Are you? Oh, definitely let me know. Definitely let me know. 100%.
And I can't let you go without a random lost word, a random one. Keep in mind they are mostly insulting, so let's have a bit of fun before we say goodbye.
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
I'm going to open on a random page. Okay, this is not a description. The word is, let's see if I can even say this, allotriophagy. Allotriophagy. And it means a strong urge or desire to eat food that is abnormal or unhealthy. Perfect.
Oh.
Let's go do some of that. Let's go eat some unhealthy
absolutely.
food.
Yes. I haven't had my breakfast yet, and you probably haven't had your dinner. So there we go. Oh, listen, Eleanor, thanks so much for having me. It was really lovely to speak to you.
And all the links for Karen will be in the show notes, everybody. So thanks again for tuning in.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out thechildren'sbookauthorpodcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Eleanor Page? Find me at eleanorpage.com or come and say hello on social at Eleanor Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.